Hi, this is Amy with the Hag Reads. I am back with another book that I finished. I'm going to do, let me see, just one today. I'm going to talk about Everland by Wendy Spinale. It's a YA dystopian alternative history Peter Pan retelling with a steampunk theme. I think it's kind of meant to mimic approximately World War I, World War II England with a steampunk bent, and it is definitely a Peter Pan retelling. So it has quite a few varied elements which make up the story. And I enjoyed it for the most part. There are a few things about it that I didn't like. And some of the things I discuss will be spoilery, so I will try and alert you when I reach the spoilery bits. I think in this new vlog format, I'm probably going to have to put a spoiler alert on most of these, because part of the reason for the format change is that I really wanted to be able to discuss the books a little more at length and my feelings about what I've been reading. As we are into the story, London has been destroyed by Blitz bombings by a German army, and there is the Blood Red Queen, who is the German ruler, and she has sent her son, who has a different name, but he is known by Captain Hook in the book, and he leads kind of a steampunk floating ships, you know, blimps, or and I think some that are shaped like actual floating ships. So it's very evocative of that kind of World War II era with a steampunk theme. And then you've got they're meant to be soldiers in the Blood Red Queen's army, but they are drawn from a combination of soldiers from Germany, but also people who, a few who have betrayed the English Empire and have basically come over and are now part of Captain Hook's forces. Well, and then you have a genetically engineered disease that was unleashed during the bombing, and which almost immediately eliminated most of the adult population, and a large part, and then the bombings and everything. So all that's left are children, and mostly male children. There are very few teenage girls left after all of this. So so you have this YA dystopian. You've got the Peter Pan part, so it's that all of them kind of weave together fairly well. Let me go through maybe now the cast of characters. So the main narrator of the story is Gwen, who is the Wendy character, and then she has a brother and a sister. So instead of two brothers, she's got a brother and a sister. Gwen is 16 years old, and her brother, I think, is 5 or 6, and the sister is 10-ish. And then you have the Pete character, which is the Peter Pan, but they call him Pete throughout the book. And then there's Bella, who is the only girl who lives in the Lost Boys city. As I said, the premise here is that there really aren't very many girl children left, and most of them are younger, but mostly it's boy children, so that's how the city gets its name, is that it's the Lost Boys. And Bella is injured. She is starting to come down with the disease, and she has steampunk wings, so she's the Tinkerbell character. And she is every bit as snotty and rude and mean to the Gwen character as Tinkerbell was to Wendy and Peter Pan. There's a little bit of jealousy, I think. Bella is meant to be between 10 and 12, and I think she has kind of a crush on Pete, that, you know, he's 17, so obviously that would be inappropriate. And then you have a large cast of Lost Boy characters whom they encounter. In the initial part of the story, it's just Gwen and her brother and her sister, and the kind of trials and tribulations they're going through, trying to scavenge through the outskirts of London in an ever-increasing outward way, because, you know, there's not much left in central London, and that is where Hook's forces are stationed, so it's not safe for them to be there. And another aspect of being the children that are left is they're being hunted by Hook's forces. He's trying to come up with a cure for this disease, and doesn't feel he can return to the Blood Red Queen until he can bring back a cure. So you have this kind of Lord of the Flies, Lost Boys, you know, they're trying to make the best of what they have, but they're little boys, and so there's, in the presentation of the characters, they're very stereotyped. You know, each character, there's one that's short-sighted, and, you know, so he's kind of a mole character, and he's digging tunnels to try and get different routes out into London so that they can move around unseen. So every character is kind of flat, and they have this one major, you know, thing about them that defines them as a character. And then there's, quite conveniently, a genius doctor who is still in his teenage years, who is working with him, and he's working on his own cure, and has had some success in staving off the symptoms for both the boys and particularly for Bella. So there's this, and then as in the Peter Pan story, there's this kind of the Lost Boys terrorizing the pirates, and the pirates terrorizing the Lost Boys. That dynamic definitely exists in this story. And so it has all these lovely elements, and I do love a retelling. I have never read the original Peter Pan, and I do want to at some point, but it had such a lovely, promising premise, and it kind of got lost in a morass of unbelievable reactions from characters. And I realize these are young characters, but it seems so hot and cold. The Pete character has this, you know, brotherly affection for Bella, and he is constantly yelling at Gwen about how, you know, even though they're not related, Bella's really the only person he has left, and he feels so protective of her, and he'll do anything for her. And then a little bit later in the story, he basically loses his temper with Bella over the things she's doing to kind of frustrate and be mean to Gwen, and tells her in no uncertain terms that if she does anything to Gwen, then he will basically exile her from the city. And it's within a few, you know, chapters of these constant confessions of how Bella is everything to him and how he will do anything to protect her. So there's that split there. But another thing that bothered me is the whole timeline of the story can only be a few days. From the time that Pete and Bella encounter Gwen and her brother, to the conclusion of the story is only 2 or 3 days at most. Gwen never bathes or sleeps. None of the characters that are in the group that is going to go out and look for Gwen's sister, who was captured by Hook while Gwen was out looking for food, none of them are going to, or the people that make up this, Gwen gets there and they leave almost immediately, and there's all these meetings and everything. So it would appear that everybody from the main group basically doesn't sleep for 2 or 3 days. And these are children. I just find that really hard to believe that they're just going on fumes as a group of, you're basically talking about tweens. You know, most of these kids are between 8 and 14 years old that are part of his group. There are very few older teens. And none of them appears to bathe. There's not much talk about eating. There's no one goes to sleep. There's no overnight, we got up in the morning and we did these things. No, it's just constant action, action, action. And I have a hard time believing that. It really took away from the story for me. That none of these people would need to sleep. None of them would need to eat. None of them would, Gwen was already in really shabby shape before she came to the Lost City, where they did talk about, all the boys were taking baths and showers. It was rationed out, so that she wouldn't have availed herself of this. And then there's kind of and this is probably kind of spoilery. There does turn out to be this romantic thing that develops between Pete and Gwen, that by the end of the story, they are madly and truly in love with each other. And so we're talking again about a 3-day period, I think, at the most. And even if you were looking at a week, even for teenagers, that's a stretch, I think, to go from, I hate your guts, you're a horrible person, all of that stuff, to being madly and truly in love. I just don't buy it at all. It really detracted from the story. I think it would have been better if that was left to, there's going to be sequels to this book. I think that should have been more slow burning. Gwen herself is not really a likable character. She's kind of whiny, stomping around, and very, I realize she wants to find and save her sister, but she's perfectly willing to put everybody else in harm's way to accomplish it. And so I didn't find her particularly likable. I didn't like Bella. I didn't, the Pete character is a very typical Peter Pan character. He comes off as very nonchalant, even though I think that internally he's very caring about the group. He does come off as that kind of arrogant Peter Pan character. And with Hook, we get to see, he's not just this bad guy that, because he's a bad guy, hates all the Lost Boys, and especially Peter Pan, who taunts him. You do kind of get a backstory with him about his relationship with his mother and all of that. And this is going to be spoilery too. So if you don't, want to hear about Hook's background before you read it in the book, probably should stop listening now. But Hook's relationship with his mother is, she is largely described as an abusive. She murdered her husband to get into power. She was abusive towards her son. Eventually he displeased her enough times that she ripped his eye out, and that's the reason for the eye patch. But every time that you come up with this, it's told from Gwen, it's told a little bit from Gwen, from Peter, so you get these little snippets where it's kind of the different characters, whoever's the main focus, you're kind of seeing things from their perspective. So when he comes up in the round, every time it's just mashed into beating it like a dead horse, that he's had this horrible childhood, and this is the reason the way he is, and he so wants to please his mother, and blah, 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 blah. Give it a rest. Everybody chooses. Even if you've had a bad childhood, there are people who have bad outcomes and they become abusers themselves, but there are plenty of people who don't. It's a choice. And so he basically wallows in his pity pool about what a horrible childhood he had and how he just wants his mother's approval and all of this. And it's the reason driving him to being a horribly abusive, child-murdering psychopath, in my opinion. That I just can't get behind. I really dislike that aspect, but they really, every time it had to be mentioned. She took my eye, and it's in every part of his. So it was fine that it was introduced, and I think I would have liked it better. But by the end of the book, I could care less. Oh, poor Captain Hook. I just didn't feel any sympathy for him by the end based on his actions in the book. And I just felt like the author was trying to gain him some sympathy. And I think if she hadn't been so heavy-handed with it, I might have felt more sympathy for him. Now, there is going to be a second book, and I should have picked up on the thematic elements much earlier in the story because the German queen is the blood red queen. In the description for the second book for the series, it looks like they're going to bring in elements of Alice in Wonderland into that. And they kind of sandwiched it into the first book as a logical next step, I think, by having the blood red queen, you know, the Queen of Hearts, be a major character in this Peter Pan retelling so that they could then kind of bring a mashup of the both into the sequel. And based on this, which I found charming in many ways, I probably will not read the second book. I'll have to see how I feel when it gets published. I think it's about a year or so away from being published. But as it stands right now, there is just no way I would want to read the book. I did not enjoy this one enough to it makes me want to, ooh, I can't wait till the next one comes out. And that's generally how I feel about YA fairy tale retellings. Usually I like them a great deal. And this had a lot that I liked. It had very interesting and unique thematic elements that I enjoyed a great deal, but I just, as I reached the end of the book, there was so much about it that kind of, you know, just little plot things that didn't quite fit with the way, you know, the way the story ran, and the time frame just really don't work for me, and that was one of the major things. But also the romance thing between Peter and Wendy, I just, you know, the Pete and Gwen characters didn't work for me at all. And the fact that Wendy is a completely unlikable character, and in my opinion, now I understand you may feel differently, but I just didn't like her at all. So there's that. And no, you don't have to like fictional characters in all the books you read. You don't have to be, you know, think, oh, I could be friends with that person, or I really like this character in every book you read. But I feel like as the heroine of the story, you should like her a little bit. And I don't think Wendy in the books, she was, I think I remember her being, or in the movies that I saw, because I obviously haven't read the book. And maybe this is closer to the book. I don't know. You feel free to tell me if you do. That Wendy was a little prissy and girly and a rules person, but not that she was this irresponsible and basically willing to leave her brother behind in order to find her sister, and willing to put the location of the Lost Boys city and their lives in danger for one person. And I always have a problem with that in books. People who are willing, or villains who become villains because something bad has happened to them or their family, and then all of a sudden they're willing to hurt anybody in order to get their revenge against a company or one person. They don't care who else gets hurt. And I always have trouble with that kind of villain, because how are you getting your revenge by being the exact kind of person or entity that caused this trauma in your life? How does that, I don't find that to be okay. Although I know humans, you know, that's human nature. That if somebody strikes against you and you're moved powerfully enough that you might be willing to do anything to sacrifice anyone regardless of it. But that kind of villain, where I had no choice kind of villain, you hurt me, so I'm going to take them out no matter what it takes. I really dislike that sort of trope, and that's what this is. She wants her sister back, and she doesn't care how it happens or who might be affected, or even that the Lost Boys might be discovered. If she's unsuccessful, she's just going to plow forward anyway. So that I don't agree with at all. I think that that's, it doesn't, it speaks to her character, and it makes me like her less. How's that? So that's all I have for today. I will be back tomorrow with 1 or 2 more books. I'm reading at a pretty good clip, but I don't, because obviously I've chatted for 20 minutes about one book, I don't want to do several in one day. I just think I'm having fun kind of drawing it out a little bit and just kind of blundering around with my thoughts. But if you've read this and you liked it, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. If you read it and you hated it, I would also love to hear your thoughts. Obviously, these are all my opinions. I'm not saying that other people shouldn't read the book. I found it charming in many ways, and I love fairy tale retelling, so I'm not sorry I read it. There was just a lot about it I didn't like, and I don't know if that equates to me reading an additional book in the series, since recently I decided I'm not going to continue reading in series that don't wow me. But if you've read it and you had thoughts on it that you want to share with me, I'd love to hear them. I would love to engage in discussion about any of the books I read. And just know that if I say I don't like a book, I'm not saying you shouldn't like it, that nobody should like it, or even that it should, you know, I would never say that nobody should read a book, because different people have different tastes, and maybe right time, right place, or wrong time, right, wrong place. In a different time in my life, I might have loved this story to death. It has so many elements that I like. So I never would, well, I won't say never, but I'm unlikely to condemn any book as completely, nobody should ever read this book, it's that bad. No. It just didn't tick my boxes for things I like and enjoy a great deal. But it might tick all of yours, and I would love to hear about it if it does. So, happy whatever time of day it is for you. If you watched to the end, thank you so much. I will see you next time. Bye!